Hello and welcome to Ms. Behavior, the podcast for college student conduct professionals. I'm Colette.
And I'm Kurt.
And Kurt, I just got back from homecoming.
I am so jealous that I could not be there. I missed.
And I saw tons of stuff on social media, all the people that I missed who were here. But we had a great time catching up with our favorite anonymous Dr. Dean, whom we both worked with.
Yes.
When she saw that I was alone, she's like, "Where's Kurt?" Like,
Oh,
oh
no.
no, the guest of honor.
For those who are curious, I have a side gig. I'm in the midst of planning a festival, so it has consumed a lot of my personal time. So a trip north was not in the cards for me. But I felt so nostalgic listening to the interview, and I thought, I do want to catch up with this person offline. And it's always great to see where somebody you worked with as a student lands professionally, and it sounds like she's had an amazing career.
I love the very first story listeners are going to hear. She talked about an activity that she still does with her medical school staff, that you were the person that taught us that activity.
A little tear almost formed on my eye. It was so nice to hear that. I won't give any spoilers, but yes, it touched me to know that somebody still had that thing that we gave them at the activity, and that they still use the activity with their team. So very sweet.
Yeah. It was interesting to hear that her story arc from being an RA to being an MD to now kind of circling back and being a dean of students.
What a journey. I think a lot of people, I think that this is when you're an RA, and you go on to do something else, like a doctor or a lawyer, that was a starting point, not something that you're going to come back to, that higher education isn't something that you come back to. Mm-hmm. So it is nice to see people giving back in that way.
Talking to you, I'm always catching myself at assumptions I make about different types of schools, and she definitely educated me about how progressive their discipline programs are when they identify misconduct among medical students.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you felt about that.
It gave me a great sense of relief, to be honest, because something that she said about, you don't want to believe that the doctor that's working on you got away with some kind of, conduct related or academic dishonesty. You want people who are working with you and your family members to be people that are ethical, and that stuck with me.
Yeah, and that they don't just punish it away, but they have really in-depth programs to address behavior,
Mm-hmm.
to support students, but also hold them accountable.
Yeah. I have to imagine how high the stakes are when you get to that level in your academic journey to become a physician, that there probably does need to be different kinds of opportunities to re-educate versus punish, because they've invested so much time and energy into the profession, and obviously they went in with good intent.
Let's hope.
It's not just about the money or cutting people apart. I don't know.
No, if anything, people are shying away from that field. Fear of lawsuits and all the pressures, and just changes. We've talked with other guests about mental health stuff on campuses. They're dealing with all the same neurodiversity.
Mm-hmm.
The world is changing, students are changing, and it sounds like med schools are changing to keep up with it.
And speaking of neurodiversity, I was so glad that she brought that up, because the case that she mentioned took me back to a time in the early 2000s where I was not aware of what neurodiversity was. We didn't have the language around it that we do today, and certainly I don't think we had the tools available to us to support students. So I am bummed on so many levels that I missed this particular interview.
She was great, and let's go ahead and let our listeners hear for themselves. So here's our beloved Dr. Dean. Doctor, we're incredibly excited to have you on the Misbehavior podcast. So we usually start by asking folks to introduce themselves and maybe tell us a time that you got in trouble.
Well, I'm mostly a rule follower, which is probably why I do what I do. I actually have a funny story about it as a parent, though. I was at a field day as a parent in the recent years, and I said something about children rule following, and another mom said, I want my daughter to not follow the rules and to break the mold. And I said, well, I couldn't do the jobs that I do as a physician and as a student affairs dean if I didn't rule follow and encourage others to rule follow. So it was an interesting conversation as a parent recently that, like, yes, you do want your children to not rule follow so that they can branch out and create and be great. But also there are times where you have to follow the rules and the policies and stay in line, right? So anyway, I am a graduate of the undergraduate institution that our misbehavior lead was at when I was an undergraduate, and I was an RA, and that's how we met. And that was my actually first foray into like college life and student affairs and whatnot, becoming an RA. And we had a lot of trainings and a lot of kumbaya moments. And actually, at a retreat that I had, I brought one of the things that we did as an RA to my student affairs group as a retreat at the retreat, which was to take a jar and to have everybody write something nice about everybody and to give everybody their jar. So I made them buy 20 mason jars for our group, and everybody has their jar with all the nice things that everybody wanted to say about them. And I still have mine from college. And when I go to my childhood bedroom, I read it sometimes for good feels. And then I have mine for my workplace now, and I also go to read it when I need some good feels.
I still have my mason jar, and you know whose idea that was our co-host, Kurt Doan.
Oh, I love that.
Kurt, he was the heart to my strategy and task orientation. Yes, he'd be so sad to not be here to hear that story.
Well, and that's funny because my role in my group is I'm kind of like second in command. And that's funny because that nature of the relationship between the person that is now first in command in my group and I are very similar. I'm also task oriented, but I am definitely the heart.
I think there is a certain yin yang that works, because Kurt and I have talked on the podcast about him as a rule follower and me as a rule questioner. Maybe like your daughter. I think it's important to have both, but a guiding vision or mission that pulls you together. Tell us the story. We knew you as an RA, like super leader. How did that path take you to become a dean of students?
Well, I was pre-med, and I think I always liked to help people who were coming up behind me, what I call near peers. So I think I always had that heart of like tutoring other people, being a TA, being a mentor in any way I could. So I think that heart was there. And then I think the student life introduction through RA was always there afterward, and like having had that experience and that living it, training it, all of the things. And I had some interesting stories from being an RA, one of which I'm going to share on the podcast.
Yes.
Today, so
Can we do it right now?
Well, it was really foundational to my work in learning how to do student conduct and misconduct work. So sure. So one of the reasons I chose to become an RA was because I realized that a lot of my friends were going abroad, and I should have gone abroad because I was a language major. However, because I was pre-med and because I then decided to pick up a science major, it was going to be difficult for me to go abroad because I wouldn't have been able to finish in 4 years and do all of the things I was doing. So I chose not to go abroad, and I chose to learn how to use my language in the medical setting in other ways domestically. But all of that to say, I decided that RA was a good idea because all of my friends were leaving and I didn't have like really good roommates to have that year. And I said, well, this is a great leadership opportunity, and it's an opportunity to learn a new set of skills, and I think I would really like it. So I applied. And I made wonderful friends that I don't think I would have made otherwise. In fact, one of my closest friends from F&M is a class behind me who was an RA in the same building in Ben with me at the time. And it's not called that anymore. But anyway, because we didn't have the house system at that point. Well, let's call it Ben. And she and I were one floor from each other. And then I had another friend who I had already been friends with through one of my majors, but was also in the same building. So somebody I was already friends with that I became closer with, and somebody that I really didn't know that well that was a year behind me that I became very close friends with. In fact, I just spoke to her last week on the phone, and we don't live proximately to each other. We live in different parts of the country, but we have stayed in touch all of these years despite. So anyway, all of that to say, we had a situation where there was a team of a male athletic team constituency on her floor, and there was a neurodiverse individual who was also on that floor, who I can definitively say was neurodiverse, even at the time before I was a physician and before I understood neurodiversity like I understand it as a physician and as a student affairs person, leader. And there was an individual on my floor who I also think was probably what we call like a little neurospicy, like either was like trying really hard to have friends or maybe was a little neurodiverse also. I don't know to this day, a little quirky, but nice guy, probably is really successful now, but like was just trying to have friends. And this sports team convinced these two individuals who really just wanted to have friends, who were maybe a little different than everyone else, that they were hazing their made-up fraternity. And I had to convince my friend, who was the RA on that floor, who really knew the ins and outs of it the best, that she had to come forward with this misconduct because it was really detrimental to the victim's well-being. And she eventually, I helped her like prepare and whatnot. She was the one that brought it forward. The only tie that I had to it was that one of the victims of it was on my floor, but everything else was happening on her floor to all of the people that she was working with. So I really tried to empower her to go forward with the information, and she eventually had enough information, wrote enough things down, felt empowered to go. And when you're a student and other people have misconduct, you don't necessarily have the follow through because it's not your, there's FERPA and there's, you don't necessarily get the follow through. However, in this case we did, because I came back for an alumni weekend when she was a senior and I had just graduated. And we went out to one of the new bars downtown that the town was expanding rapidly and beautifying itself rapidly. And we went out to some new bar downtown and we had a drink together with some other mutual friends. And some of the people from that sports team came up to us and actually pointed her out and said, "You're the one that turned us in." And I don't remember if they were expelled or if they had severe sanctions, but like we had to confront them and somehow they knew who had turned them in. And it was uncomfortable, but we managed the situation just fine. And I think they were leaving and we were still there and it was fine. But anyway, we did have some closure. I don't remember what the closure was, but we had some closure. So I think that was my first foray into student misconduct. And I think as somebody who's a physician and is pretty congenial, I was very conflict avoidant. And that was very uncomfortable. But our morals were right. And we knew that these gentlemen were being hurt by the things that were happening. And we couldn't let it go on anymore. And we had to turn. So I think that was really foundational for me in doing student conduct, because even in my work as a physician and as a physician mentor and as a physician teacher for all those years, I wasn't really in student conduct until I stepped foot in student affairs 3 and change years ago. So I thought about that incident a few times since then as I've done student conduct, and really just like it is uncomfortable to bring people forward when they've not done a good job, but it's really uncomfortable if you're their peer and you don't have the power differential.
We're going to do a Halloween special, which may have aired already by the time people are listening to this podcast, about parents, because I remember, if it was not that case, what you've described is very similar to another case I remember around that same time where we had video evidence of the hazing. And we sat down with a student and his parent to show, because I'm like, this is irrefutable, that you can't defend this, and we need the parents as partners. And that was probably my first real eye-opening. Of course, working at a school like this, you're going to get yelled at by parents. It's just a regular diet. But they did defend it and at least put on the airs that they saw nothing wrong with the behavior that they saw in the video. And I remember a senior administrator who was also there telling me I was getting too emotional because of my desire for accountability in that case. I'm glad to hear, if it was the same case, that there was some closure for you all. Those are challenging times.
I think like now as a professional in the space, there's a power differential, there's a professional presence. I have a lot more, obviously I have many more years, but and maybe some white hair now with in the space, and like have honed some of the skills. But even in my 3.5 years doing it, I've gotten so much better at managing professionalism lapses in professional student spaces, because I have graduate students. I do not doctoral students. I don't have undergraduates, and parents are generally not involved because they are very much over 21.
Surprised, because even employers are getting parents calls now. So I'm heartened to hear that.
I have only spoken to parents for conduct purposes twice. Not even. Sorry. One was an academic situation. So once.
Find it institutional too. The school that we were at, lots of calls. The school I'm at now and the school I was at previous, rarely and usually productive. So I wanted to ask you, because we are the feeder for your types of schools. Mm-hmm. I would not say that pre-med students cheat more, but sometimes their response to accountability is different. And med school comes into the conversation with consequences of, I can't have this on my record or I'll never get into medical school, or worse, I'm a good person and how can you be doing this to me because I'm going to medical school? And I wonder what you see then on the other side, because it does feel different. And I will say, for the record, it's not pre-med students that cheat the most at all. Business students are shown to have the highest numbers. But do you have any?
Yeah, I have a lot of I have a lot of thoughts. I think there's intention and there's occurrence, right? For lack of a better term. And your heart and your intention could be good, but you could still misstep. And I think so when they're questioning, like, I'm going to be a doctor and how could you say that I did something wrong? Or I'm going to be a doctor and how could you put that on my record? Doesn't mean you can't misstep. We all make mistakes. Every single one of us makes mistakes. Now, some of the mistakes are worse than others, and some of them have worse consequences than others, and some of them get swept under the rug, but that's a whole different podcast, I'm sure. So what I find is the most common reason why people come to us for professionalism lapses is because they're trying to cut corners. And so I think when you have look, we all cut corners in different ways, but do you really want a physician that cuts corners during your surgery? Do you want a physician that cuts corners during your procedure? Do you want a physician that cuts corners during your primary care, years of primary care with them? Like, no, you don't want anybody who cuts corners. And so I think people just cut corners sometimes and it gets them in trouble. And there's no intention to it. And so that's actually what I find the most is either lifes outside of school, and it's so distracting that something lapses. Like somebody doesn't follow a deadline and it has a punitive action, or somebody can't study for the thing because life is lifing, but can't bring themselves to ask for help. Yeah. Asking for help is so hard, especially if you're in a helping profession and you're type A and you've done all the things to get to there. And then I also think that sometimes you just cut corners, and we've all cut corners. I mean, like, sometimes I have to do regulatory modules and you can't go to the next one until the whole thing goes and you can press the click. Right? Mm-hmm. And, are we multitasking? We're multitasking every minute. Am I answering a text, about my son's whatever, or my daughter's whatever, or my husband's whatever, or this person's whatever, while I'm like waiting for the regular? Yes, I'm multitasking. We're all multitasking. Well, is that cutting a corner? Yeah, I mean, it is. Did I do something wrong? No, I didn't. Like I had the regulatory module up. I did what I had to do by the time I had to do it. But should I have been multitasking? Probably not. Because I'm supposed to be paying attention to the thing that I'm supposed to learn from my institution. Yep. So that's cutting a corner, but that's pretty minor. When you cut corners and it's not minor, you get into trouble. And I think that's probably what's happening for the pre-professionals of the group, is that probably the most often thing they're doing is they're trying to do too much to get to where they're going, and they wind up cutting corners, and then that is what gets them in trouble.
You're making me think too of it almost reminds me of first gen students, even though it demographically, or you would look at those as two really different populations, but the pressure, like my parents are paying a lot of money, or my parents have made a lot of sacrifices for me to be here. I have to pass this test. I have to get into med school, and this is the hardest class, and there's a certain nobility to I just want to have this profession where I can help people, and yet cutting corners is a great term for that.
We had an individual that came to professionalism for cutting corners last year, and it was hotly debated among our promotions committee afterwards whether this person should come to a dismissal hearing or not. And this was not academic integrity, this was something else. And then we had, everybody has academic integrity issues. If you're an institution, you have academic integrity issues. It doesn't matter if you're undergraduate, graduate, doctoral, whatever, there's going to be academic integrity. So we've all seen it. And sometimes that's cutting corners too. And sometimes you didn't mean to cut the corner, but you did the thing. And now with AI, there's a slippery slope also. And that's all I'll say about that.
Curious. I always hate threats, or especially empty threats to students. We got it in high school from our teachers, like, you'll never be able to get away with this in college. And then you go to college and you realize, well, everyone makes mistakes here too. And then in college, we threaten them, like, you'll never be able to do this in graduate school. What are the sanctions at a medical school for maybe similar behavior that we see in undergrads?
I think it depends on the school, but there's a similarity among many MD and DO conferring U.S. programs, in that there's generally an honor board of their peers, which is led by a faculty member who has some training in that space. And usually the president of the honor board has some training in that space, or came from some kind of student conduct or RA work in their undergrad career and has had at least some light training in the space. So their peers, at our institution, their peers they're basically a member of student government. They have an elected role within student government to be the president of the honor board or a member of the honor board. So it counts as a student government position. And there's bylaws around how many can be from each of our campuses and how many can be from each of our classes, and what year the president has to be, and all of that. All of that to say, so we have a code of ethics, and if you break the code of ethics or the honor code, you have to meet with the faculty advisor, and you have to meet with the honor board president. It used to be that you would just go to honor court, which was a court of your peers that were on this honor board. But in recent years, they've employed a second model, which is restorative justice, and everybody received training in restorative justice. I've also received training in restorative justice. Now, I am not there to be part of the restorative justice process, but I am there to introduce the idea to the harming party, right? And then I have been a harmed party on a recent restorative justice case. So now I've actually been inside of it and realized that it was even better than I thought it was as an outsider. Like, you don't understand it fully until you've lived it, kind of thing. So what happens with it is, at this point in time, the way the policies go is that the person who has had a mishap with the code of ethics will go to the faculty member and have a pre-meeting with the faculty advisor to the honor board and the honor board president, and they'll determine if the person is remorseful or not and what the level of severity of the infraction was. And if the person's remorseful and wants to own it, they will be offered both honor court of their peers and restorative justice. If they are either have a very serious infraction and it doesn't seem eligible for restorative justice, although there's some nuance to that and some gray zone in that, so we won't go into that. But let's just say if it doesn't seem like restorative justice is an optimal choice, or if the person's not remorseful and is not owning, because some people are not there yet, they go to a court of their peers.
Impressive.
And sometimes the court of their peers doesn't have enough evidence to find somebody guilty, even though they probably were, and sometimes they do. So just had people that have repaired that in their process of becoming more professional after a lapse, have actually come forward and been the teachers for the thing. So, for example, one of the people that went to honor court because this person was not ready to own or fully understood the gravity of the thing, it was a social media case. And actually, the person then a year and a half later helped us revamp our social media policy. And then, over the course of the next year and a half, helped us revamp our social media policy. We actually were able to present it to peers in the professionalism space at a conference. And this person actually then taught about it to the peers.
That is true restoration and user-centered design.
Yes.
Two of my favorites.
So it was really beautiful. It was real, and I had actually known that person before the professionalism lapse, during it, and after it. And it was really nice to see the entirety of the process.
Our next episode is going to be with a student that went through a very similar process and ended up on our honor board and is one of the strongest members. I am going to ask you just a curiosity question. Conduct meetings with other conduct officers recently, somebody brought up that a medical school that was doing recruiting made an announcement to prospective students that if they had anything on their disciplinary records that was going to maybe disqualify them from med school admission, which is something we have never said. That because people do make mistakes. And we were trying to figure out, is this an outlier who, like, their med school has no idea they're saying this for their admissions program? Or do you think this is something that's coming that we need to be more transparent with students?
So I sit in the student space once they matriculate. And I very, very much want to learn more about the admission space, but my time and talent and balance do not allow that because of the ratio of students to my group, lack of a better way of saying that. And so I have not really forayed into the admission space. What I will tell you is that when there are situations where we need to know about it from the lens of admissions to matriculation, we do find out. Also, where I do live is the career advising space from finishing at the medical school to getting into residency. And so I can talk a little bit about that. I could talk a little bit about admissions as well. So there are the stipulations of the university and the program. There are the stipulations of the licensure body for all programs. And then there are the stipulations of actually becoming a licensed physician, all of which need to be congruent with each other. And because you can't let somebody in that then can't pass to the next level. You also have to be able to be credentialed to be a medical student at a hospital before you're fully credentialed as a trainee. Right? So there's all these levels of credentialing. So there probably are some hard passes. I don't know what they all are because I don't sit in that space.
As there should be.
As there should be.
Yes.
Background checks and fingerprinting and child abuse clearances and, all of the things.
Looking at the red flag.
That being said, I think if people have things that have been expunged from a record or minor infractions, they are potentially considered if they're not non-starters.
Be having a beer in their room their freshman year of college, I don't think is a disqualifying behavior.
But I also think it depends what's fed forward and how the other institution is feeding forward, right? Because you don't necessarily, as an institution, you don't want to sweep things under the rug, but you also don't want to do your graduates or soon-to-be graduates a disservice and deny their chances at anything,
right,
depending on what the infraction is.
Right.
And we have the same thing in med school to residency transition. We have to decide when they go. So I only talked about the part where they break the honor code, but there is a much larger world in which they're unprofessional but haven't broken the code of ethics. And those students sometimes are just having trouble outside the classroom and become unprofessional in some way. They miss a deadline to take an exam, start not showing up for class, they start not showing up to clinic, is like the most common examples. Or they're not answering email that they have to answer in a timely manner. I mean, just kind of professional things that are not behooving of a person that needs to work full-time and needs to work full-time in a helping profession and be responsible to other people as well. And so those are things where, to a certain level, we do also do professionalism advising and mentoring over the time course of the rest of their time in our institution. And that's called professionalism monitoring. And each individual, whether they broke the code of ethics or not, gets professionalism monitoring. So there's a professionalism advisory board, and that board determines who will be the individual faculty monitor for the student. They are senior faculty members who generally don't have to grade the student so that there's no conflict of interest. If they have to grade the student, then they wouldn't be the one that's assigned, or they would have to have a partner in the grading, do the grading and eval, and they would recuse themselves from the grading. So all of that to say that there are at any given time in an institution as big as mine, there are more than a few handfuls of students in this process. And, if, as you can imagine, if they misstep at a student formal in their first year, by their fourth year, they're probably pretty professional unless they had another lapse. But if they misstep closer to the time where we have to certify them and their applications and whatnot for residency, it might be a little too close and there might be a feed forward. Or if there's continued concerns about professionalism, it might be a bit of a disservice to their next institution where they're going to be training to not feed forward. So that we have rules in place and policies in place about how the Professionalism Advisory Board reviews and determines the feed forward. And the feed forward happens via conglomerate letters that every medical school has to write to residency programs for every student, called Dean's Letters.
You saw me taking notes over here. I'm writing this down, professionalism education. That's a language we don't speak. At least I've never heard it in undergraduate circles, but it's such a great lens that I wonder if we could start at our level. We talk about executive functioning skills, but this is different. It's preparatory.
Right. So the interesting thing is that professionalism education actually is threaded throughout their medical education, and it starts in year one, and it actually now starts in orientation week.
And is that at all medical schools? Because I'm going to adopt this language now. When you get to medical school, your first class, your first semester, you're about professionalism, and we want to prepare you to be as successful as possible.
So in their third year at my institution, I actually started teaching in this my first year as a faculty member. There's a professionalism course in the third year that threads through the third year, but they have threads through their entire curriculum of ethics and professionalism.
I love that.
So it's woven into the curriculum because they are becoming many people think of physicians as one of the utmost professionals that you have to be, what you would want to be your treating doctor, right? So it's woven throughout the fabric of all of the parts of, and the way that we're so collaborative because you're going to be working in teams for the rest of your life. And so even when they're graded, their peers give them evaluations, they give themselves evaluations and their faculty. So everything is like almost a 360 evaluation. When they go out into the clinical space, they do get 360 evaluations, but at least they're getting evaluations, and the peer evaluations are so important. And if they don't fill out their peer evaluations by the time they're supposed to, they can get a sanction. I mean, even just not completing evaluations in a timely manner. So if you don't make deadlines, because like if I didn't make a deadline for somebody's treatment,
it shows
there's
your
life
values.
or death consequences potentially, right? Or morbidity associated, maybe not mortality. So
wow.
The stakes are a lot higher.
Are there things that we could be doing better with undergraduates on our end to help prepare students or prevent some of the things that you're seeing?
I think the executive functioning is huge. So my scholarship is a lot in the accommodation, disability and inclusion space now. And more medical students come into the space needing accommodations. More and more students are divulging that they need accommodations because it used to be kind of hush hush. And there's a certain percentage of our population that has attentional issues, and there's just the learning how to become a professional and learning how that keeping up with your email hygiene is part of being a professional. And we just had a student that his professionalism monitored worked with him on his emails because he had almost 5,000 emails. And he just taught him how to do folders and flags so that he didn't miss an email, because part of his professionalism was that he missed an email and then he missed a deadline and he missed a communication. And I think back to when I finished med school, maybe, or during med school, and at some point I had 10,000 Gmails, and like I had good executive function, but I had no time because I was trying to do too many things. So I had all these Gmails, and I said, I need to start making folders, start having email rules. Nobody taught me that. I just figured that out.
Yeah.
But some people have to be taught that. And it's interesting. I just had a conversation with a student I know very well, and I know that the student has accommodations for attentional difference. And the student actually said to me, I'm struggling. I went off my parents' insurance and I lost access to my care.
This question, I do not know if it'll make the podcast. When I left our shared place, I went to a school where I taught first year seminars for science students. And they paired me with the biochem and chem students who were analytical, fun, critical thinkers. They were great at that stuff. And you shared that you were a liberal arts major. Once in a while, I'd be asked to substitute for the students that were in the pre-med track as their major. And I found them the opposite. That there was this sort of vacuous quality to the group, like a group think. They didn't want to be asked to think critically. They would literally say, tell us what you want us to tell you. Perfectionistic. They wanted to memorize stuff and they were really good at that. But I wondered, is this just me? Or, because I know med schools for years have been saying, don't just send us pre-med, send us your dance majors, your language majors, your history majors, who happen to have the bio and chem stuff. But am I just crazy? Did I just stumble upon some groups that were outliers? Or
I mean, I think the trend in medical institutions in the last number of years, and I went to a medical school that I think prided itself on having a lot of non-traditional students, and that's not always a good thing in terms of progression and education in medical school, because if you're too non-traditional, meaning you're too many years out, or maybe you've already started a family, you might actually, your time might not be your own, or maybe you're too far out from the science education and you're not like into the grind of studying, and kids call it the grinding. It's a verb, it's a, whatever. Anyway, so all of that to say, but they did pride themselves on taking people who weren't science majors, taking people who had other careers. And I find a lot of value in all of that and having adult life experiences. Now, this is coming from someone who did not take any time off, but I think I was already very well-rounded and pretty mature.
Yes.
And, but that's not most 22-year-olds. Like, I don't see that necessarily in most 22-year-olds. And so every year at our orientation, we find out the spread and we find out the average. And at my institution, the spread is usually something like 21 to 40, give or take a year or two. This year it was 21 to 44 or 45. The oldest person in my med school class, my personal med school class, was a divorced mom of a few kids who used the military to pay for her med school, and she was in her late 40s.
Oh, wow.
I always wonder what happened to her. I think she's practicing somewhere in a different state.
That is boss.
Would love to know what happened to her after all these years. But all of that to say, in my institution now that I work in, it's generally like 21 to 40-ish, early 40s, maybe late 30s, and then but the mean age is usually something like 24. So the vast majority of people are 22 to 26, 27. And then there's obviously the person, the Doogie Howser, or the person who skipped a grade somewhere.
Yeah.
And then there's the people that had other careers. And I often find that the people who had other careers are so interesting. In fact, actually, one of the strongest residents that I had of late was somebody who's actually a year or two older than I am and was an editor, a journalist and an editor, really cool woman. And then just was like, I think I want to be a doctor. And completely went back to school and finished residency in her early 50s. And I mentored her. She wasn't in my day that I usually mentor residents, but I had enough interaction with her and really valued her so much, and her maturity and her take on everything, because it really came like so naturally for her, because she was like the best aunt and the best physician, and also just had this maturity about her. And I said, what about your love of writing? What are we doing with that? And we got her a publication and a podcast from just getting her into a writing contest through one of our professional bodies.
Brilliant.
And now she's doing more writing again and pairing it with her physician work.
That's exciting.
So I think those things that you did that made you come back. And I'm doing some of that myself with things that I'd like to come back that make me. So
That's going to be a soundbite.
offline, I'll tell you more about that.
Misbehavior is written and produced by Colette Shaw and Kurt Doan. Theme music was written and performed by Kevin MacLeod from incompetech.com. You can contact Ms. Behavior at msbehaviorcollege@gmail.com. That's msbehaviorcollege@gmail.com.